Reconvene the general session. Will the recording secretary please call the roll?
Kirsten Barnes, Catherine Williams Brown, C. Michael Cooney, Linda Darling Hammond,
Present.
Marisol Escobedo, Jose Gonzalez, Makita Gwynno Shire, Alicia Hine, Bonnie Cladd, Caban Quinn, Monica Martinez, Castle Redmond, Ade Rodriguez, Tina Sloan, Christine Zeppos, Michelle Zuma. We have a quorum.
Okay. So I now recess the general session and move to the Education Preparation Committee. Commissioner Gonzalez, will you please reconvene that committee?
Good morning. I'd like to reconvene the Educator Preparation Committee. We have 2 items remaining this morning. Item 4G is Teaching Performance Expectations and Program Standards for the Preliminary Education Specialist Credentials. This item is being presented by William Hattrick and Sarah Solari Colombini. This is an information action item. Mr. Hattrick, again, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. Agenda item 4G presents draft teaching performance expectations, PEs, and program standards for the 5 new preliminary education specialist teaching credentials for the Commission's consideration and adoption. Significant work took place by experts in the field in the development of these TPEs. Additionally, feedback surveys were available for the public to comment on proposed TPEs. After this feedback was shared with the expert work groups for further review and subsequent edits were made. Since the this agenda item, various stakeholders and members of the community have provided feedback regarding the names for the credentials, especially for the name exceptional, for what had been mild, moderate support needs. As the names are still up for discussion, we'll refer to each credential as noted in the item, with the understanding that the name or names could change. On the handout, which is on the back table there, there is a table that shows the names that have been proposed thus far. One challenge has been ensuring that the new name is distinct and separate from the existing mild, moderate, and moderate severe disabilities credential titles. Since the intended focus of the new credentials is based on the educational needs of the whole child rather than federal disability category, the proposal as of right now is for mild to moderate support needs to be renamed exceptional support needs, and for significant support needs to be renamed extensive support needs. The table on page 2 further shows the difference between the current and proposed credentials in terms of federal disability categories. In collaboration with the California Department of Education, explicit definitions for exceptional and extensive support needs are being developed so that the distinction is clear for both programs that will be preparing candidates to serve students and for local education agencies. Special ed teachers will be able to work with students across those disability categories, so a determination on the least restrictive environment for a student will ultimately be based on the student's educational needs and their IEP.
Okay, so in 2015 and 2016, new standards and TPEs were adopted for the multiple subject and single subject credential programs. This work was completed under direction from the Commission to strengthen and streamline preparation standards. So the TPEs form the foundation of what teachers new to the profession should know and be able to demonstrate at the initial licensure. The TPEs play an integral role in determining the design and delivery of teacher preparation program curriculum and fieldwork experience for candidates. Following the redesign model of general education standards and TPEs, new education specialist standards and TPEs were developed. Previously, there was one set of education specialist TPEs with 7 sets of program standards. To strengthen and streamline the education specialist preparation pipeline, the work of the Education Specialist Preliminary Credential Work Group mirrored that of the multiple and single subject program standards and TPE overhaul. As TPEs define what knowledge, skills, and abilities beginning teachers should have upon entering the profession, in this item there are 5 sets of TPEs, one for each of the initial credentials that the Commission has adopted as the credential structure for special education licensure in California. The exceptional support needs, TPEs, were initially developed by the work group with the concept that the general education TPEs are the common trunk of preparation for all teachers. These exceptional support needs TPEs represent the additional competencies needed to become a successful special education teacher. The extensive support needs TPEs were developed to identify the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed for a teacher to meet the full needs of students requiring additional support due to their disability or disabilities. In Appendix D, the unique extensive TPEs are listed first in each domain, followed by the relevant exceptional TPEs that these teachers will need to be successful in their field. Once an appropriate TPA is developed for these education specialist candidates, they too will take and pass a commission-approved TPA as their multiple and single subject peers. The TPEs for deaf and hard of hearing, visual impairments, and early childhood special education credentials are in Appendices E, F, and G, and they were drafted for each of the standalone credentials. As you examine the competencies within the TPEs for each of these unique credentials, you will see the general education competencies that are woven throughout each set in a way that is contextual and relevant for each of those credentials. The required knowledge to be an effective teacher in a variety of settings has been incorporated into those TPEs. Since the new early childhood special education credential will include birth through kindergarten, the draft TPEs require candidates to demonstrate competency in both the preschool learning foundations and the kindergarten frameworks. So moving on to the program standards. One set of revised education specialist program standards was developed, as opposed to the 7 that existed before, and organized in a parallel structure to the recently adopted multiple and single subject program standards. As the TPEs define what candidates do, program standards govern what the program does. It is the unique set of TPEs for each credential that becomes the credential program's curriculum, which is why Program Standard 1, which addresses a program's design and curriculum, has 5 subsections within it, one for each of the 5 preliminary credentials, which has been differentiated to accommodate the specialized knowledge associated within each area. Program Standard 2, preparing candidates to master the teaching performance expectations, is how programs will be designing their course of study for their candidates. Program Standard 3, clinical practice, now has more prescriptive language around the minimum number of hours, 600, required, as well as appropriate placements that include experiences in general education environments, as well as experiences in a broad range of service delivery options. Program 4, monitoring, supporting, and assessing candidate progress towards meeting the education specialist credential requirements, help programs define how their candidates reach candidate competence in teaching and developing the skills to continue growing in the profession. Program Standard 5 is currently titled Assessment of Candidate Competence until such time that an education specialist TPA is adopted by the Commission. Then the title should change to be similar to the multiple and single subject title, which would be Implementation of a Teaching Performance Assessment. And then finally, Program Standard 6, the Individual Induction Development Plan. It provides a clearly defined roadmap for each candidate that helps to guide the candidate's next steps for their development towards mastery in the teaching profession. So with that, we move to recommendations, and there are 8 staff recommendations on topics that are for your consideration and potential action for this agenda item. And based on action taken today, staff will proceed with the work implementing the Commission's direction. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite members of the public, and prior to us starting, if you can, we have 3 action items. We want to ensure that we have a quorum later this morning. So if you can be concise as possible with your public comment, and then we'll allow the commissioners to engage in some question and comment. Pam Hunt, if you can please state your name and affiliation for the record.
That's good? My name is Pam Hunt. I'm a professor in the Department of Special Education at San Francisco State University and coordinate the Moderate Severe Disabilities Program, or what was formerly called the Moderate Severe Disabilities Program. And I would like to speak to make some comments about the TPEs and about the Education Specialist Program Standard 1B. And again, my comments relate to the Moderate Severe Disabilities Program, or the Exceptional Support Needs Credential Program. First, a few words about the TPEs. We really appreciate the effort and the time that the subcommittee and the CTC staff put into designing the standards for our credential program. We are impressed by the comprehensive nature of the TPEs, and we really appreciate that there is an increased emphasis on access to the general education curriculum for students with extensive support needs. And this is a growing and very exciting area in our field today, with the emergence of evidence-based practices in academic interventions for this population of students. So bravo for that change. We also appreciate the increased emphasis on access to inclusive educational settings and to teaching communication and self-determination skills within the context of academic and other instruction. So we see these as very positive changes. We only have one recommendation to make, and that is that we be careful to make sure there are distinctions between the two credentials. That the lines can get blurred. If you look at the TPEs, I think the easiest way to make those distinctions is to focus on or continue to include language that focuses on level of support need. So, for example, there are TPEs related to providing access to the general ed curriculum. Well, the teaching expectations look different for a teacher who's supporting a student with extensive and complex support needs in their access to the general education classrooms. For example, the general education curriculum. For example, students significantly impacted by autism versus the teaching performance expectations supporting a student more mildly impacted by autism to access the general ed curriculum. So I think those distinctions can be made very clear by just building in that language, referring throughout the TPEs to the level of support need that's relevant for the different credentials. And then I wanted to also say a few words about the Education Specialist Program Standard 1B as it relates to the Extensive Support Needs Credential. We began our review of the documents for 4G and 4H agenda items with the TPEs, so we were pretty excited about what we were reading. And then we turned from the TPEs to the program standard for the Extensive Support Needs Credential, and we were very surprised by the complete mismatch between the two. When we looked at the program standards standard 1B, we saw most of it. It's three paragraphs only, but most of the language was disability names. And then there was the requirement that candidates understand what the causes of those disabilities were. Well, I've never understood why that was actually a requirement for a credential program preparing teachers, because knowing the cause of a disability, and we must, also point out that for some disabilities like autism, we're not sure what the causes are, that helps teachers be more effective in their instruction and in their other support. what's important is for teachers to understand how a disability impacts the student's access to learning so that teachers can provide the supports that they need in order to fully act and fully engage in that learning. So we would recommend that Program Standard 1B be completely rewritten, that it represents a very close alignment with the TPEs. And then before it's written at all, that the standards are developed. The standards should directly align with the TPEs. The standards describe what our credential program needs to do to prepare teachers. And we're preparing teachers in order that they can demonstrate those teaching performance expectations. So we would expect a complete, almost one-to-one between the two. And then Program Standard 1B is simply that 3-paragraph description of the characteristics of the standards. So I think maybe we're putting the cart before the horse, and the standards have to be developed. Or you could, if you needed to develop Program Standard 1B right away, at least look at the TPEs and make sure that the two are aligned. The description of the program, preparation program, and then the TPEs that are the requirement for the graduates of our program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hunt. Jean Goncier? Yes. Please state your name and
It's already
the
on.
affiliation.
This on already? Yes. I don't do very well in front of a microphone, so I apologize. My name is Jean Goncier-Gurdon, and I'm a professor at California State Sacramento. And I am today representing all of the faculty in special education. And in fact, I'm going to really be addressing and highlighting the points from our letter that we submitted to you and is in your packet. And I'm probably going to be reading some of the statements just to make sure that I'm sticking to my time and addressing all the issues. Okay. So first of all, again, we want to echo a lot of what Dr. Hunt just said. We want to acknowledge the work of the CTC staff and the subcommittee members for their commitment and their work towards the preparation of the ed specialist credential candidates in California. We appreciate all the time and effort that has been spent working on this agenda item 4G as well as on 4H. And today I'd like to address 3 main areas. First, response to the proposed authorization statements for the exceptional needs credential and the extensive needs. Then I'm going to address the TPEs and the program standard 1B related to the extensive support needs. And then the TPEs related to and standards related to the exceptional support needs credential. So I'm just going to jump right in to our concerns. We have concerns. Basically, these 2 credentials need to be clearly identified in terms of the types of skills that teachers need to serve students with exceptional versus extensive needs. We feel that the proposed authorizations don't differentiate clearly enough between the 2 credentials, that the term extensive certainly describes the level of need, that we kind of want to focus on needs versus disability labels, but the term exceptional does not. Exceptional is a term that has historically been used to describe all of special education. We encourage, again, the Commission to revise those terms and come up with descriptors that indicate the level of intensive needs. In addition, we believe that there is far too much overlap in the authorizations, so much so that we're concerned that it harkens back to the previous debate of having a generic special ed credential, which this was met with overwhelming pushback from the field, and CTC dropped that plan. So though we understand that there is always going to be overlap in terms of the skills that all special educators need, there are definitely certain skill sets that teachers need to serve specific levels of disability. And I won't go through each one. It'll take a different time, but you'll see that our concerns suggest related to, for example, the specific learning disabilities as defined below. And we've included definitions of the different disabilities in our letters that are defined by IDA to kind of clarify our points. But for example, specific learning disability as defined below should not be included in the extensive needs credential, only in the exceptional needs credential. We also make recommendations related to the multiple disabilities area, the other health impaired, traumatic brain injury, developmental disability, other areas such as intellectual disability and emotional disturbance. And again, I won't go through each one, but we feel again that we would encourage CTC to look at the ID regulations and make sure that it's quite clear that the proposed authorizations are appropriate. So again, for example, a child, we have in our letter, for example, a child who has acute asthma, which affects his or her attendance, as a result, their academic progress, does not need a special ed teacher who is highly trained to work with children with the most intensive and multiple disabilities. So again, we really just encourage the Commission to really take a look again at those authorizations, make sure there isn't overlap, and that the labels are really defining the needs of the students that are being addressed. Next, we would like to address the proposed TPEs and programs. 1B for the Extensive Support Needs Program Design and Curriculum. And again, similar to what Dr. Hunt mentioned, initially our review of the TPEs was very positive. We feel that the TPEs are generally comprehensive. There's a focus on supporting all students in learning, creating and maintaining effective learning environments, understanding and organizing subject matter instruction, instructional planning and design, assessing student learning, and developing as a professional educator, all really important areas. The TPEs do reflect current understanding of best educational practices, but we're concerned that they're a little bit generic and what we would consider to be best practices for all students. So when we turned to a description of the standards for the Credential program that would prepare teachers to demonstrate TPEs or teacher performance expectations with students who experience a range of moderate to severe and multiple disabilities, we were really surprised at the gap between TPEs and the standards, again, kind of harkening back to what Dr. Hunt mentioned. For example, Section 1B has 3 paragraphs which basically list a number of disabilities and the requirements that the candidate demonstrate knowledge of the underlying cause of disabilities. And again, that harkens back to the medical model that we've moved away from quite a bit.
Ms. Concierge, can you
Yes.
wrap up your comment,
Sure.
please? We'd appreciate it.
Sure. So, and for that, we just recommend that the program standards be rewritten, similar to Dr. Hunt's comments. And then lastly, just to address I want to make sure I have time to address the program standards 1A. Related to that, our comments are similar to those stated above in 1B regarding the TPEs and the program standards. Subject matter knowledge is not sufficiently emphasized, and key skills such as literacy instruction are not sufficiently emphasized related to particular learning disabilities, such as dyslexia and language processing disabilities. In addition, we don't see an emphasis on the ways in which an educator uses specialized skills, particularly with marginalized populations, in the ways in which an educator uses their specialized skills. Anyway, there needs to be an emphasis, again, on language and the standards which more explicitly articulates the complex interplay among these various factors, abilities, disabilities, language, and social, cultural, economic factors. And then there was a concern by our faculty, too, that learning disabilities were barely mentioned in the proposed TPEs. And again, that's a large group of students that we address. So in conclusion, we recommend that the standards for the exceptional needs credential be rewritten, and that these standards should reflect what considered evidence-based practices for working with youth with specific learning disabilities, autism, mild to moderate intellectual disabilities, OHI, OI, and emotional disturbance. And we're always available for support to the Commission at any time, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. We have Ms. Brown assisting us with the timer over here. You'll hear a chime at about 2 minutes, and we'll give you a little bit of an extension, but if we can stay as concise as possible, we'd greatly appreciate it. Maureen Burness, please.
I just want to clarify, we have 2 items on special education this morning. One of them is focused on the TPEs and the standards and the subject matter requirements, and the other is focusing on the authorizations. Is that correct? Subject matter goes with the authorizations. So for G is focused on TPEs and standards. 4H is focused on subject matter requirements and authorizations. And it'd be helpful if get a second card if you'd like to speak to the second item. But if we could keep the testimony focused on the item in front of us, that would be helpful.
Thank you for the clarification. Please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning, Maureen O'Leary-Burness, and I am here as the co-executive director of the statewide special education task force, which did its report on one system actually a couple of years ago now. And my only concern here is just to reinforce the issue of the need for the least restrictive environment for all students and to ensure that anything that is aligned with the teaching performance expectations actually supports the concept of access to the general curriculum and to general peers in support of the one system concept. And then additionally, because I've been on the phone with Vicki Graff from Belfast the last 2 mornings about this issue, she texted me this morning saying that Judy Silva intended to be here to represent CAPSI, and she is stuck in the airport. And so she asked just that I reinforce that their letter also supports this concept about ensuring the least restrictive environment. Thank you.
May I please have the trio of Dr. Tracy Eagle, is it Terry, and Patricia Pernin. If you can all please state your names and affiliation for the record.
Patricia Pernin from Los Angeles Unified School District Program Director for District Intern and Credentialing and Added Authorizations.
And I'm Dr. Tracy Eagle. I'm an administrator of the LAUSD District Intern Program.
And I'm Terry Rackley, and I'm with the Intern Program, LAUSD.
I'm going to start with my 2 colleagues over here, and then we'll go into what LA Unified has sent to you. Hopefully a copy of that, and we'll review it very quickly.
Okay. I wanted to thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to serve on the Early Childhood Special Ed Expert Panel. Thank you so much for that opportunity. Being able to sit down with my early childhood special ed experts from all over the state has been extremely valuable experience for me, and it's helped inform our early childhood special ed credential, which is brand new, starting this month. Thank you.
And I, too, would like to thank you for the opportunity to serve on that panel. Like Dr. Eagle, serving with the experts in the field was illuminating and was stimulating. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'll give it over to Dr. Pernin.
Thank you. Dear Commissioners and Madam Chair and Executive Director Sandy, the department in LA Unified for Special Education as a district and a special education local plan area that supports over 600,000 students and over 80,000 students with disabilities. We believe in the opportunities that the proposed TPEs can provide for preparing our new teachers to better serve our students with disabilities. So as we look at this on the first page, Los Angeles Unified School District embraces the idea of having candidates better prepared to support our students in inclusive settings, developing positive behavioral supports, improving communication supports, use of a multi-tiered system of supports with person-centered and family-centered planning. We believe these TPEs are critical for our education teachers to know and embrace as they start their careers working with our students with disabilities. On the first page, you can see many of the things that they really liked about the TPEs. Again, all related to the idea of including knowledge of requirements for appropriate assessment and identification, encourage use of data, as well as focus on communication supports with both the family and, of course, with all of the curriculum. As we take a look at the second page, LAUSD reviewed the TPEs for the 5 proposed credentials and have the following comments regarding them. LAUSD believes that the titles of the credential should clearly articulate the population of the students they serve, and that the exceptional or extensive description are too similar and will cause some confusion amongst stakeholders. The original proposed terms, we do believe, maintain the intent to focus on the educational needs of the whole child. Therefore, we respectfully request consideration for using mild to moderate support needs and significant support needs. There needs to be, number 2, there needs to be an element to address the needs of English language learners with disabilities, including developing linguistically appropriate goals, preparing students to be able to redesignate. There also needs to be an element to demonstrate an understanding of how to identify, assess, and address reading difficulties through structured literacy interventions. In addition, more reference in supporting students with autism with evidence-based practices, structuring the classroom and instructional practices across credentials. In LA Unified, we have over 13,000 students identified with autism. Why is TBA, this is a question, a focus when there are other disabilities that have many more students whose needs affect their ability to be successful in the general classroom and the least restrictive environment without teachers knowing how to address their unique needs, such as autism? Connections to community resources and agencies is needed in language around transitioning to post-secondary outcomes. Add language regarding understanding that behaviors are communicative and serve a function for all preliminary credentials. Students with, quote, exceptional support needs, unquote, are not likely to require alternative statewide assessments. We recommend the language change to a more generic statewide assessment. Recommend that terminology and examples should include less jargon. And for example, and they gave some examples, evidence-based high leverage practices. Add to the DHH, because we have a large population of TPE collaboration with GE teachers to provide social interactions with hearing peers and adults to have an appropriate English language models for teach students. And concern for the visually impaired TPE that a requirement to demonstrate proficiency in multiple areas may not be a reasonable expectation of our VI teachers, as it requires a sophisticated skill that even our highly experienced transcribers do not always possess. These are some of the suggestions that were made by the department, our unit for special education. Lastly, LAUSD would like to thank the committee for selecting members of our staff. We really want to thank them to participate in the TPE development expert panel for each proposed preliminary credential. LAUSD supports a change in the teacher preparation models that will better prepare our education and special education teachers to educate our students with disability in an inclusive setting, have the necessary skills to provide educational benefit, and meet the unique needs of our diverse population. If you have questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to speak with Beth Kaufman, who is our Associate Superintendent of Special Education in LAUSD. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Danette Brown. Please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Thank you. Good morning, Danette Brown, representing the California Teachers Association. First and foremost, we want to thank everyone in this room for their attention to the Ed Specialist credential and the thoughtful discussion that we've had over numerous months, whether it was at this venue or the opportunities we had where commission staff really reached out to the stakeholder groups and listen to our feedback. We really appreciate that, and we think the agenda item that's before you today really reflects some of that feedback. So we wanted to thank you for that. The California Teachers Association supports this agenda item in a nutshell. We understand that there are some elements that might need a little more refinement. We heard back from some of our members, our ed specialists, that it's a little foggy between the exceptional and extensive support needs, which I think was echoed by previous speakers. We believe that there might need to be some fine-tuning there just so that there's a little more specificity. So, having said that, I would like to humble brag for 1 minute in anticipation for the next item. So, in April, I also want to thank everyone here for having the presentation by Dr. Christine Olmsted, the Associate Superintendent of the County Department of Ed, who is in partnership with Butte County Office of Ed, moving forward with the SUMS initiative, which is the statewide initiative to really help us on the local level implement a multi-tiered system of support. In my district, La Habra City School District, we're a tiny little school district in Orange County. We applied and we are one of the recipients of that grant in cohort 1. So I've spent the better part of the last 18 months having really intensive professional learning opportunities with the county through this initiative in my district, on my district leadership team, and at my school site. So in closing, I would like to share that my school, Las Lomas Elementary, has implemented, well, where we're at right now, we know that we have room to grow, but we really implemented MTSS in a awesome way. Some of the things we've been able to achieve this year is we have been able to really meet students' needs in inclusive settings. We have them in the least restrictive environment. We are using data and it's fun. And also my school this year, after our implementation in year 1, we had the lowest percentage of referrals for special ed testing. And so I just wanted to take this opportunity to humble brag about how we have been able to really create a system in our school and in our district that is doing right by our kids, and we're excited to move forward. And we believe this agenda item is in line with where we're going as a state. So thank you.
Thank you. Kristen Wright.
Kristen Wright, Special Ed Director, California Department of Education. I'm here in solidarity as well as to just let you know that this is really important. And this is important because of how much impact this credential and how we look at this credential has on the system and has for the implications of our kids and where they're served. And so we had in the past about the credential dictating a specific classroom that students are labeled as and attend. And I think what I'm hearing is very exciting and promising, which is a very all hands on deck. These are our kids, and a lot more talk about more inclusive education. And this is one of the critical pieces to the puzzle. And so a big thanks to Sarah and William and Mary and all of you for bringing this along to a place where I think we have a lot of promise. And I also think that this definitely reflects where we collectively want our system to head. And so I'm here to say thank you. And that I hope that we will continue to have this dialogue, because one of the things that, as you know, that we do at the Department of Ed is part of our responsibility under IDEA is to monitor districts around ensuring that they have the right types of teachers with the right expertise teaching populations of students with disabilities. I know there's a varying thought about how you classify that, and across disability categories, what we've learned is that there are students in all the disability categories that go from mild needs to extensive needs. And so moving away from having specific disability categories served by specific teachers, I think is more reflective of where our system is. And children getting identified for special education are identified under a particular disability category, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the whole label that they're wearing. They come with many needs, including they may be an English learner, may be socioeconomically disadvantaged, and many other things. So that qualifying disability is what qualifies them for special ed initially, but their needs run a gamut and from a variety of needs. So again, thank you for your continued partnership with us. I'm excited to see the engagement level of the community around this issue. And again, thank you to William and Sarah And I hope that moving forward, the one thing that I would hope is that we can work really carefully together around defining what it means in both of these categories, because we're going to have to go in and be able to monitor for it. So mirroring some of the specificity that's been asked for around each of those credentials will be really critical to how this rolls out in the field and how our folks regionally are helping districts meet the demands of both of those credentials. So thank you for having me. And again, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, open the floor for comments, questions.
Would it be helpful at all for the staff to address some of the issues that surfaced during commentary before age?
Great. So I'd like to respond to the first concern we heard about the program standards not being in alignment with the TPEs. And I think it's important for us to understand that, again, the program standards govern programs, and the teaching performance expectations really are about what the teacher needs to know and be able to do. And they work in tandem. So the curriculum that programs offer are, in fact, designed around teaching performance expectations, right? If your teachers need to know and be able to do something, your program is going to be designed around those specific things. Now, in the program standards, we included disability-specific language partially because education code requires around orthopedic impairments and DHH and VI as well, that teachers be prepared specifically to serve those populations of students. So we thought, you know what, we should just be really clear and include all of the disability categories so that programs have that responsibility to prepare candidates to work with all students, with all of the needs that those disabilities represent, from the range of mild, I'm going to use old language here, so from mild to significant. So programs have this task of preparing candidates to, of course, meet teaching performance expectations, but also they have this vision and mission about how that is to occur. Right? Choose residency models, some choose other ways to do that. But it is, in fact, they are aligned. It's around how a program chooses to offer those competencies, how they choose to design that instruction to their candidates, and how they determine that their candidates can then learn and demonstrate and practice those skills and abilities. So it works in tandem. And so I'd like, Terry, why don't you come up and explain how we've designed the program standards and the TPEs to kind of be complementary.
This is a change that happened as the preliminary multiple and single subject standards were coming to you. Originally, they had 21 standards that were mixed up with what a program needs to do and what a candidate needs to know at the end of the program. Your current multiple single subject standards, there are only 6. The standards are very spare. They fit on about 3 pages of text. The most extensive standard is Standard 3 about clinical practice, which is kind of the same thing as in this set of standards. I actually wonder, do we really even need 1A through 1E? I really think 1 might be sufficient. It just says you have to have a rationale for your program design. That's all we need a program to respond to. So there's something that we could think about whether A through E is actually needed, because the specific program is going to be preparing the person to meet the TPEs for that specific credit. So we really don't want to double dip or double sample here, which is what we used to be doing in the old standards. We would tell them the program has to do this, and we would also say the candidate has to do this. So now we've been a little more articulate. I've actually separated those two things into 2 buckets that work together. Program Standard 2 for both the multiple subject and in this set of standards says you must teach all the content of the TPEs, you must give your candidates the opportunity to practice all the content, and you must assess it. So that's why we don't really want the standards to duplicate the TPEs.
Just one more thing. Certainly, when you or if you adopt the program standards, it's really easy for us to come back to you in August, September, November, the next meeting with amendments to include some of these, just some fine tuning to include some of the suggestions that were asked for in the letters that you all kind of have in front of you. So adopting the standards today doesn't mean that you're stuck with the specific language that you see in those. We certainly can go back and tweak some of those specific things in an amendment. So,
Commissioners? Commissioner Grenoshire?
So these notes reflect my thinking last night, which has been somewhat modified, but let me just start there. I too want to thank all the staff and the members of our educational community who have brought us to where we are right now. I share many of the concerns that have been raised by my colleagues both this morning as well as in previous testimony. I have 3 areas, and again, some of this has been addressed. The first has to do with the labels, and what we have today are some suggestions for how we might rename them, and I really like that we are moving towards perhaps moderate support specialists or extensive support specialists with the focus on the preparation, not the focus on the students with disabilities. Second, I still think there's a misalignment with the TPEs and standards, and I don't know if it's a matter of tweaking or just stepping back in and looking at them a little bit more closely. And so I'm not so sure at this point in time about adopting them. And then the third area that I haven't heard in public testimony, but I've seen it in some of the letters, and it's an area that is of great concern to me, is does the current proposal allow ed specialists to work with students without disabilities? If we are wanting to support districts moving towards TSS framework, I'm not so sure this current structure allows special education teachers to work with students without IEPs, and I think that needs to be clarified. Thank you.
I think the last item, your last point relates to the next more fully than it does to this item, so if we can hold that thought, put a pin in it, and get back to it.
I agree, Marion. I heard your comment earlier, but they are so interrelated. It's hard to separate this conversation out, so that's why I included it here. But again, thank you. I think William and Sarah have done an amazing job in a very, very complicated revision of credentials. But as we've said before, we've got to take the time to get it right. This is such important work for our field. Thank you.
Commissioner Zeppels?
Great. I, too, reiterate the thanks. We've been watching this for years now. And I'd like to agree with Commissioner Grenoshire. AICCU institutions feel the same. We have the same concerns about the name labels, about still work need to be done on the TPEs. And so while no one more than us wants the regulation so we can start modifying our programs and working towards that, I'm concerned that with the work that still needs to be done, without tabling it to make sure that that's done and we're adopting regulations that we can live with, would be something we really need to consider and make sure that the final regulations do come out as the field agrees upon. So again, we desperately want to move this forward quickly, but we also want to make sure that it's correctly as well.
Commissioner Klatt?
And I also want to say, just it's exciting to see at every meeting how far we've come from the last meeting, and so so thank you for all the work that's been done. And I just have 2, I think, rather pretty small comments. One, I wanted to ask about, or at least just make a comment about LAUSD brought up. It's their second bullet point, the issue about literacy. as I was looking through the TPEs and looking for that support for reading and literacy, or thinking about students with dyslexia and reading difficulties, I couldn't really find much in the TPEs for the exceptional support needs candidates. I could find it in some of the others, but not that one. And so I don't know if there's a reason for that, or if it can't be put in there, but that would be a question I would have. And then the second thing, this is small and maybe nitpicky, but in the TPE 1 for the exceptional support needs, it's on page, let's see if I can, I can't find the page number at the moment, but it's the TPE 1. There is in number 4 there at least a mention of post-secondary education. And I've brought up in past meetings my concern for high school students with abilities who are trying to access college. And I'm wondering if under number 5 in that TPE 1, where it talks about students assuming increasing responsibility for learning and self-advocacy, and it lists some things, career, independent living, and community participation, if college couldn't be in there also. So developing skills related to career in college and independent living and community participation, just to, again, emphasize for our students who, that we're not limiting students with special needs from accessing a college path.
Commissioner Sloan?
I wanted to just acknowledge the deep the people who commented around the work and the letters that we received, and also around the deep thinking that went into developing these standards. I was thinking about, I've been engaged in this kind of work for many years, and it's like developing a continuum of teaching or rubrics, and you are both working within the category that you are focused on, so in mild, moderate needs, significant support needs. And then you're also looking across from general education to mild, moderate, significant support. And it takes a lot of tweaking in both ways, constantly. And I think where we are is with a fantastic foundation. And what I'm hearing, which is very encouraging, is that people's comments are very similar. We're all sort of seeing the same things that we want tweaked in the work, and that's also very encouraging. So kudos to all of you who put this together. And then I would say, regarding the continuum, notice that we received a table this morning that showed, I believe what we're looking at is we're seeing how from the general TPEs to the exceptional ed specialists that they align. And this is something that my colleagues were asking for as we're designing our programs. Could we get a better, they started to do it themselves, could we get a better understanding of how we're moving from general ed to exceptional or mild moderate to, significant supports to any of these other things? And that in our thinking, as you tweak some of these, if we could develop these for programs and other people to really understand that and help us also understand the distinction between the mild, moderate, and significant support, as people had said, I think that could be really exciting and helpful. So thanks for your work. I know how hard it is, and it is great work.
Chair Darling Hammond.
Just building on the comments that Commissioner Sloan and some others have made, there are several areas of recurring tweaks, if you will. And I'm wondering whether we can clarify those today and, at least be sure that we've vetted our understanding about that and vote to approve them as you suggested, with the tweaks coming back as this becomes an ongoing process en route to regulations. I just want your view about the process.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because it did feel quite premature to create that document without the approval of the commission on those standards, right? So here to me, that's an implementation document, right? As you look at it, it's definitely moving from gen ed through special ed as the base. I'll let Terry.
I think it would be very helpful if there was a conceptual approval of the part agreeing with, and then we can take all of the letters, and we can actually even invite the community if they have anything else within the next week and a half to get it into William and Sarah. We'll go through and create a complete list of issues, analyze them, and bring back recommendations at the August meeting for any fine-tuning related to any of the issues that are in any of the letters or that we hear about. My concern is if we don't do anything, we're going to have this huge bucket again in August, instead of having just these really specific fine-tuning things that need to be dealt with. So if that is something that could work.
Yeah, I was thinking of actually giving you a little more help by being very clear, as Commissioner Klatt just was, about specific areas that we may have some consensus about. So, for example, the inclusion of attention to language literacy, language needs for both English learners and literacy generally. The inclusion of college is one of the things that kids are being prepared to transition toward. The clarification that the program standards do include all the T's by reference. So I think, that's very, very helpful in terms of understanding the program standards. I actually would love to hear more from Commissioner Greno-Shire if there are specific things. I think there's a consensus that we need to come up with the right labels for the credentials. I was thinking we could have a raffle between now and August, and the winning names. We could figure out you get a week in Sacramento in August as your prize or something. When it's 110 degrees. But I think it would be helpful if Commissioner Greno-Shire could say a little more about your second point. You said there were some things in the standards that you felt needed attention, so that we can help you by getting those on the table. And then if we can give a conceptual agreement with those things at least articulated, that might help us move forward.
I want to return to Terry's suggestion about, because the field and I have concerns about 1B. So can you talk a little bit more about if we just got rid of A through G or A through
E?
A through E.
If you look at the 3 paragraphs, excellent. If you look at standard 1, that is saying, you have it right here. Those paragraphs at the top of standard 1 are about the program providing opportunities, and it's very possible we may want to get rid of some of this language of knowledge of disability characteristics. That is something I've heard, and we'll put it as a note. The second, third, and fourth paragraphs talk about this is things programs need to consider. Then the goal the first 3 paragraphs are on 36, actually. The next 5 little sections were meant to individualize program standard 1 for each of the 5 programs. I'm not sure that's needed because I think the TPE do that individualization. I think if we looked at the 3 paragraphs in standard 1 and figure out, is there anything here that doesn't apply to all 5 of the credentials? Is there anything important in A, B, C, D, or E that really should be brought up and identified specifically for that program? And then we just get rid of A through E. I don't think it needs to exist.
So I think conceptually that sounds like a plan.
And I have some professors in the back of the room who are saying, yeah, that really works for them too.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Because I could not see the nodding back there. Again, to what Chair Darling Hammond said, if conceptually that's the idea, then I think that I would be in support of that. The other, and we talked about the labels and then the raffle, but something that really speaks to the kind of operation that differentiates these 2 categories, and there have been some suggestions.
It might be helpful today if you talk about the options that are in the handout and just say what you like or don't like about them.
Yes.
The handout you had this morning that has the alignment for the standards does have a table at the top with some label suggestions that we've heard. And by hearing you say what works for you and what doesn't work, it might help us. And I'm inviting the public also to suggest names. The caveats are it has to be different from the current mild, moderate, and moderate severe. It cannot overlap with those names.
So then I'll just put out there, I like
because people are already authorized under that credential for specific things, and this will not be the same.
It would confuse employers a lot. They wouldn't know which mild mod person are you, and so how can we assign you?
So then this moderate support specialist and the extensive support specialist, I think are in the right direction. I think they differentiate the kinds of support. I think the perspective is on the teacher and not the child to avoid some of the issues that we heard about. So I want to see the folks in the back, what they think about that. Oh, we got a thumbs up. Okay, good.
There was another suggestion for just support specialist and then extensive support specialist, just to throw that out, dropping the word moderate for that.
The concern is that moderate appears in both of the earlier authorizations, and if the word moderate is in either of these, it could still be confusing.
Okay.
So we would like to get away from the word moderate if possible.
Just to call the first one a support specialist, and then the second one an extensive support specialist.
Commissioner Klatt.
Just briefly, I think that also supports the idea of MTSS that we've been talking about. To me, that label is much more aligned with the idea of MTSS. It's a support specialist. I mean, that they're supporting, and I like that one.
And remember, this title follows education specialist, support specialist, or education specialist, extensive support specialist.
That's a lot of special.
Commissioner Zeppels.
So I'm hearing a lot from my folks in the field, and they don't have the handout, and this is not my area of expertise. So I think while it's great to give feedback, I do think it's important. I know we rely on the CEDAR group and the CAPSI group and the AICCU institution to really look at the language, and we have the conversation with those experts in our institution. So while I think it's great to throw those out, I just want to make sure whatever's moved forward that there's that opportunity, as you suggested, Terry, to find that with the experts, and I'm hopeful that will happen.
Bring it back for action in August then.
Correct. No auction. Raffles and auction. I didn't know that happened here.
Commissioner Redmond.
I just want you to know we've been consulting the field, definitely a lot. Paul Sindelar, our CEDAR representative, he was the one who suggested support specialist and extensive support specialist.
Commissioner Greneau-Shire.
And then the other part is, does the proposal allow the support specialists to work with students?
That's the next item. We can't talk about it during this item.
Just do not want to lose that. Thank
you. Chair Darlingham.
So I'd love to encourage folks, if they have other specifics, to bring them forward. And then I would like to signal in some way our intent to adopt with these revisions that would come back in August, so that we give you sort of a conceptual go ahead, so wind at your back. And so I just would like to encourage, if anybody else at the table has specifics they want to be sure are. And then I assume that, as Commissioner Zeppa was noting, people will go back to the experts that they consult, and we'll let you know as soon as possible upon having done that whether there are other specific things that are very, very important, so that when we see it in August, it will be so close that we can, with the movement of a comma and the completion of the raffle, move ahead. Does that make sense?
Just for clarification, Chair Darlingham, are you asking for further recommendations from the commissioners, or are you re-inviting members from the pub? From the commissioners, okay. I did receive a few more comment cards after comment period, after this one, in this one. My concern is opening the comment period once again after it's been closed. So if you can, those that submitted cards, if you can pass on those recommendations to staff, and we'll ensure that it's a part of the revision phase. Now, to process, this is an information action item. Do you have enough information to move forward and come back in August? Do you want a formal adoption in conceptually?
I'm wondering if we can't act on some of the items. For instance, item 4, 5, 6, and 7 on page 6.
So in other words, are you suggesting that perhaps the commission is ready to adopt the TPEs, but hold on the program standards? What are you suggesting?
For those specialty areas, and so if you want to look at it, so items, recommendation number 4, 5, 6, and 7 on page 6, and we understand there's a partial option for the others with amendments. Conceptual adoption.
Intent to adopt.
Conceptual, okay. Intent to adopt. Thank you. Is that what you said?
Pending fine-tuning.
Pending fine-tuning for the others. So 4, 5, 6, and if we could go through those, that might be helpful. Thank you.
Commissioners, anyone would like to attempt that motion? Commissioner Klatt?
I will try. So I would move that the commission adopt recommendations 4 through 7 in the item, and that we indicate intent to adopt items 1 through 3 and 8 at our next meeting. With fine-tuning. Thank you. With fine-tuning. Thank you.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Hine, second. Any further comments or discussion? Commissioner Sloan?
If we're adding the summary of what we heard here, or should I just give it to you? Summary. So we, in addition to everything we heard, we dealt with the labels, the distinction between the program standards and the TPEs. There was a lot of concerns about the distinction between the, whatever we're calling it, the moderate, severe. There was language that we always want to be ensuring that we're focused on least restrictive environment. There were focusing on students' needs versus disability categories. There was the idea around attention to language needs. There were the literacy interventions. There were the transitioning towards college. There were references that we need more specific language for working with students with autism. And then there was this idea that behaviors are communicative and serve a function, and that should be included in all credentials. So I thought that's what I summarized.
Any further discussion?
I have one question I'd like to see if the staff maybe could help us with. The issue of disability categories versus needs. And I think what we see in these draft documents and in the next item is attention to both. And I don't think it's an either or. As I understand it, and this is not my field either, so I rely on a lot of experts to help me understand this, but can you say anything about that will make sure we have clarity of expectation?
Part of what we're waiting for on the needs is some work the department is working on. And so looking at both Kristen and Aaron, they're thinking a lot more about defining some of this. And so as we work with them, we're going to be able to get more of the language about the needs side. Right?
So is it also my understanding then that that work is pending our adoption of TPEs? So we've set some, and then we provide an authorization. So then we begin to tease out within the frame of what we adopt. Then we can get, there's a kind of stepwise process. So Kristen, I'm
seeing nodding. Kristen nodding, yes.
Can you come and help talk to us?
Join us in the fun.
So my question really is, it's been my understanding that as the commission comes to closure around what the performance expectations will be for support needs and significance or extensive support needs for those two in particular, that that and also defining the authorizations for those credentials sets the stage for further conversation about how we interpret that for monitoring purposes.
Right.
And so you will then need to get into the deeper level of detail in collaboration with us. So am I correct in understanding that that part of the process is awaiting action from the commission?
Yes, and we've started to think about it, but yes.
Okay.
I would say so. I think it which comes first, the chicken or the egg in this situation?
There is an egg here and there is a chicken. I don't know who got here first.
Yeah, exactly. No, we're at the ready.
You're at the ready, but you're awaiting some action.
Yes.
And can you say anything, and I don't know whether I'm asking an intelligent question or not, but there are some lists of disability categories, and we've had lots of conversation this year about whether we continue to really focus on disabilities or needs. And what more do we need to know about that so that the commission is ready for what comes in August?
We can work with staff to help prepare something, for sure, to give everyone a little bit more basis in that. And so Erin's been doing some research for us on our end just about where can we pull the pieces from to really get a sense of how to delineate those two. So
okay.
That's to come. So we're happy to continue that work based on what happens today.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion. Second, direction. Call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Hattrick and Dr. Solari Colombini. Item 4H is proposed content, knowledge requirements, and authorizations for the education specialist credentials for special education teacher candidates and additional authorizations for credentialed special education teachers. This item is being presented by William Hattrick and Sarah Solari Colombini. This is an information action item. Dr. Solari Colombini, will you please begin?
Work related to the infrastructure of special education credentialing continues in item 4H. While item 4G addressed the program standards for special education teacher preparation and the teaching performance expectations related to each specialized credential, item 4H tackles other necessary components to licensure in California. At the February 2018 Commission meeting, the Commission adopted 5 initial education specialist credentials. And once this structure was adopted, staff returned to the Commission at the April 2018 meeting with the historical background of content requirements for the Ed Specialist credential. And some options for consideration for the appropriate content knowledge requirements that would need to accompany these new credentials. So in addition to content knowledge requirements, what also is in this item are some authorization statements, and you also have a handout with another draft sample authorization statement. So we'll refer to that a little bit later. Right now, we're going to start with the discussion of content knowledge requirements for the new special education credential structure. So there are 3 options for content knowledge requirements for Ed Specialist credential candidates. The first option, which provides the most flexibility, is to maintain current practice and allow prospective candidates to meet the multiple subject content matter requirements or the single subject content matter requirements in either English, math, social studies, art, music, or a world language. The second option would be to allow prospective candidates to meet the content requirements through a multiple subject route or through a single subject route that is a little more restrictive. It would just be English, social studies, math, or science. And then the third option would just be to have, it's a K-22 credential, so this would just be to have everyone meet the content requirement through the multiple subject route. Staff is recommending that the commission select option 1. It is the most flexible option.
All right, so now we'll get into the authorization statements. With the introduction of new education specialist credentials, authorization statements that match the preparation of candidates to teach students with disabilities need to be crafted. It should be noted that all existing education specialist credential holders will maintain their credential with the authorizations that match the scope and content of preparation that they received for as long as they hold their valid California credential. Included in this item are the original proposed authorization statements for the exceptional support needs credential, the extensive support needs credential, and the early childhood special education credential. Staff has received multiple letters of feedback regarding the authorization statements and has created additional draft language for the Commission's consideration. That language is included in the handout that has been provided. The language in the authorization statements reflects the intent of all services on student needs and to allow for services across the continuum of program options. It provides the flexibility for special education teachers to provide specialized support to meet student needs. It is anticipated that the authorization statements for visual impairments and deaf and hard of hearing credentials will remain the same. It is the level or intensity of student need that differentiates each of the credentials. In addition, only the extensive support needs DHH or VI teacher may serve a deaf-blind student. To examine the differences between the current authorizations for the mild, moderate, and moderate severe ed specialist credential and the proposed exceptional and extensive support credentials, I'd refer you to Appendix A. As you can see, there are actually many similarities between what a teacher who is prepared for a mild, moderate credential and the scope and content of the new exceptional support needs credential. So should an existing mild moderate credential holder want to support students with needs aligned with the new authorizations for special ed teachers, looking at the categories orthopedic impairments, multiple disabilities, and traumatic brain injury, then developing an authorization bridge could be possible.
So we have some recommendations for consideration and potential action. And I'll go through those because they kind of go all over the map since we have 3 different things in this. So the first is to maintain existing requirements for content knowledge for special education candidates. So that would be the first recommendation. The second would be to adopt proposed authorization statements, whether they be the ones in the handout in front of you or that we have the ones created for this agenda item 2 weeks ago. For the exceptional support needs, extensive support needs, and the early childhood special education credentials. And we know those names will be changing for those titles of the credentials. Recommendation number 3, you need to strike that recommendation. It was left in there erroneously, so that's not a recommendation for consideration or action. Recommendation number 4 is to direct staff to build a bridge for existing mild, moderate, and moderate to severe and early childhood credential holders so that they can earn the new credentials, authorizations to their credential. And then the 5th one is for staff to develop the bridges. So number 4 is, do you want to have a bridge for existing credential holders to earn the new authorizations to make their credentials equivalent to these new credentials? And number 5 is then build the bridge. That's the difference between those 2 recommendations. Do you want a bridge? Build it. So those are our 5, or actually there are only 4 recommendations because 3 is struck.
I just would like to add a little bit of additional clarity to the handout, which is called Draft Sample Authorization Statements for Item 4 consideration that this is essentially, and we took it out of a dense paragraph form so that we could easily see the elements of it, but in response to many of the issues that surfaced in the last conversation about the need to more proactively reflect the system of support frame, the middle bullet that says provide specialized instruction based on student needs to students requiring intervention in a general education setting with a tiered system of support has been added for your consideration. So the rest of the language there is pretty much what was produced and published in your agenda. But that additional bullet was intended to be very, very clear that what has been allowed by the Commission previously, that specialists could work in settings and provide these kinds of services, was not seen by the field. And we got multiple comments from letter writers, from the professors of ed admin and others, that it absolutely had to be a proactive statement, the kind of change in environment that we're moving forward with. So that's why the staff put this together for your consideration, is to make it absolutely abundantly clear that a specialist could work across the spectrum in a multi-tiered system of support, providing their specialized instruction. Right? So that, just wanted to underscore that for your information.
This time, I'd like to invite members of the public for public comment. And reminder, if you can please limit your comments to 2 to 3 minutes, it'd be greatly appreciated. Maureen Burness, please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Yes, thank you. Maureen Burness from the California Statewide Special Education Task Force. Here to say thank you very much for having us here. Thank you so much for all of this work you've done. And I really want to compliment the staff, everybody here at CTC, particularly Sarah and William, who have been incredibly great, patient about listening to input. And so in particular, I'd like to acknowledge that we sent a letter saying, wait a minute, we need some more discussion about this. We've had that more discussion. And again, I think, and I feel like this handout that you have really does address the needs that we had great concerns about. So to say we're supporting these authorization statements because of the fact that it does such a better job of increasing flexibility, allowing for the different options that we've supported in a one system kind of environment. The other thing that I particularly like about it, because we had a lot of conversations about listing all these disabilities, is that you don't want to ever have to have a program that becomes disability specific, because every disability has a range of the way it's demonstrated within any one child, just like an autism spectrum disorder can have somebody with very few needs all the way to very extensive needs. So I really appreciate this statement. And then just because the item also talked options, we would also support option 1 because of the fact that it does provide the most flexibility. And I very much want to thank you all again for your patience in listening, and the staff for their great work.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. We've lost our quorum. I think someone needed a health break, and we've selected a name out of the ex officio.
And who is the winner?
The drum roll, Marquita Grenos-Shire has the vote. And when we have a quorum, you don't have a vote. But if somebody needs a health break, then you are the voting member.
Thank you. Jenny Teresi and Barbara Howard, please state your names and affiliation for the record.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jenny Teresi, Riverside County Office of Education.
Barbara Howard, Riverside County Office of Education, Executive Director, Center for Teaching Innovation.
We want to acknowledge the extent of Commission on this side, on this very intense side. We definitely appreciate all of it. And we're speaking specifically today regarding the content knowledge portion of the item. And speaking in support of option 1, it does provide the most flexibility, and we feel that that contributes to keeping that pipeline open as much as possible and not exacerbating the severe shortage of special ed teachers. Now I'm going to turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you. When we think about special education teachers being the facilitators of a system of support, we think the wide range option for their background content knowledge is really important. Autistic student in my care as a special education teacher needs calculus, I need to ensure that that student has that, but it may not necessarily fall on me to deliver that content. I wanted to give a brief and encouraging report to the Commission on our classified employee grant that I think relates to this item in an important way. We have 100 slots that have remained fully filled. 20 of those folks are in classrooms today, less than a year after receiving that grant. But I will tell you, the obstacle for the others is the CSAT. So that's just important to remember. If we think that it's not an obstacle, our grant is focused on special education. So often those folks with that unique heart and bright capacity are challenged by the obstacles of a test. And so I want to make sure that stays on your radar, that that is an important obstacle. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brown?
Still morning. Good morning. Danette Brown, representing the California Teachers Association. With regard to agenda item 4H, we also support option 1 with the demonstrating your content knowledge. We believe that that option provides the most flexibility and keeps that pipeline as broad as possible when we're bringing people into the profession. Having said that, with regard to the draft sample authorization statements, the one-pager, we are vehemently opposed to bullet 2. And let me explain why. When the bullet starts out saying, provide specialized instruction, we believe that language is regressive. That language, to me, means that if a student has needs, the ed specialist gets to be the one to take care of them and teach them. When in our model, in our district, we want to keep our students in an inclusive setting with their teacher, we don't want them pulled out. And our ed specialist role has shifted as we've implemented our MTSS model. And our ed specialist works as a specialist, as a consultant, as a facilitator. And our ed specialist has raised the level of knowledge for everyone on our campus to meet our students' needs all day long. We object to the language, provide specialized instruction. We have no problem based on student needs. We know there are require interventions, but that notion that the ed specialist is the one to deliver the instruction promotes an isolationist, siloed system, and it does not work for where our district is going with MTSS. It does not work with where our school is going with MTSS, and we don't believe that language is helpful moving forward. We object. Thank you.
Thank you. Jane Robb? Please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning, Jane Robb, California Teachers Association. I have a question. Obviously, Danette said we concur with option 1 on the subject matter, and that is absolutely correct. I do have a question, though. In last meetings, PE was included as one of the subject areas, and in this one, it is. So we wanted to clarify if that was a mistake or an intentional change.
That was a mistake.
Okay, so if you make an adoption, can you make that clarification that it does include that and all the other subjects that were listed in the earlier item?
It does not include PE. So to include, when PE was included in
So PE
April,
was a mistake last time?
Correct. That's what I meant.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. The second item I want to speak to is the idea that this draft authorization statement, I have it because I'm here, right? And I have it in front of me. The recommendation that went out to the public was this item, and it went out with 10 days notice. And my commission colleagues at staff will know that I have talked to them in the last week about specific parts of this item, clarifying language, and to have this then presented at the meeting, I really think disenfranchises the public and transparency, because this is not something, I get it, you guys can suggest anything you want at the meeting and change a recommendation, but there was a recommendation. And now there's an alternative to the recommendation that nobody has seen unless they happen to be in this room. I double checked last night, I double checked this morning. This is not posted. So I think that hurts transparency. And on an item of this importance, I think that's unfortunate. The last thing I wanted to say is I absolutely want to emphasize what Danette said previously. I love the support specialist title and extensive support specialist title. I think that really describes adequately what these support specialists, these special education teachers are going to do. But I think in the broader sense, our goal is to build capacity, right? And if we keep taking specialists and having them increase basically the student population they're working with, instead of increasing the capacity of the teachers in the general ed setting to work with general ed students who have needs that are not currently being met, then we do go backwards. We turn, we're trying to avoid those and we're making our own problem going forward. It's not necessary in the places where MTSS is being implemented well. Special ed teachers are not teaching general ed students in intervention. Sorry, I keep getting those mixed up, which maybe is a good thing, because they're helping the teachers who teach things develop their capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pam Hunt. Please state your name and affiliation for the record.
I'm Pam Hunt. I'm a professor. I think it is on, yes. I'm a professor in the Department of Special Education at San Francisco State University, and I'd like to give some feedback related to the proposed changes to the content knowledge requirements. There are students in our credential programs and in the credential programs across our department who are having a hard time with the CSAT. Not a lot, but this handful. And it's interesting that many of them are strong in our coursework and are performing very well in fieldwork settings. And I'm thinking of one candidate who is hired by a very high needs school district in the San Francisco Bay Area. And they really appreciate her performance. But she's taken the CSAT over and over again, and it's an expensive thing to do. And she showed me her study notes and her flashcards, and she can't pass it. And she sent me an email 3 weeks ago saying that she was giving up on teaching. Now, this is a young woman of color who is fluent in Spanish, and this is a school district where there's a large percentage of students who are who speak Spanish as their first language. We can't allow this to happen any longer. We can't lose these potential teachers. And I would strongly recommend that we identify a collection of undergraduate courses that serve as an alternative. I believe we've had this in the past. Why can't we bring this back? And yes, most candidates will take them. But for folks like this young woman, we're losing her to the field of teaching unless there is some sort of coursework alternative. So I hope there's some way that you can make that happen. Thank you. There is. It's very specific, and it's tied in closely with particular majors. So if you could just look at that closely and make that option more widely available to all the candidates who need it, I think that would be terrific.
Thank you. Jackie Campos.
Hi, I'm Jackie Campos. I'm here representing State SELPA. At our June meeting, we met to discuss the options, and State SELPA would maybe separate the quality issue from the quantity issue, and our discussed option 2 is the option we're supporting. These are many students in the state of California, and we think that maintaining a really high quality and high standards is important, and the shortage is, in my opinion, and the organization's opinion, a separate item. And also we concur about the CSET being an obstacle, so we don't see the standards as an obstacle. It's more the way to get to those standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Joyce, please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning. My name is Joyce, and I'm past president of CARS Plus, the California Association for Special Education Teachers. And I started texting other members while listening. I didn't have an intention of filling out a card this morning. I'm just here to gather information to take it to our summer board meeting so that we can help implement what you all decide. But the word support is a human resources word in every single school district in the state of California. It refers to either a professional education support specialist, which is a para-education position, highly thought of. Couldn't operate my classroom without the paras that I've had in my life. New in HR this last year, 2 or 3 years, we've been seeing a support specialist, which is a general education teacher who works similar to a TOSA, which is not a classroom teacher. So many districts are already using the word support in the TOSA system. So the CARS board would like you to, I text a couple of them, I said, what word should I suggest? And they had an array of things, and of course CARS would say a resource specialist, and when I whispered to my colleagues sitting next to me, they said, well, that's an old term. And I said, but that's our. We're a resource to families, we're a resource, all special education teachers, not resource specialists, but all special education teachers are a resource to their site admin, to their general education colleagues, to the students who are identified with learning disabilities, to the parents, to community advocates who come on campus. We're one of the first referrals. CARS understands that we have had this, because of the caseload, word resource is something that a lot of people are trying to veer away from. But our biggest concern is the word support has as much or more baggage with it currently in the education system. I think you need to go back and look for a different title, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your thoughtful comments. Commissioners, I'll turn it over to you for comments and questions. Commissioner Brown? I'm sorry.
You have one? And also, I would appreciate,
I apologize. I missed one more speaker card. Got shuffled out of order. Elizabeth Hara? My apologies, Ms. Hara. If you can please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hada. I'm representing Teachers College of San Joaquin. I was also a member of the committee to talk about the content, knowledge, and also the program and standards and TPEs. So I'm a little nervous, so please excuse me. I spoke, I believe it was at the last meeting or the prior meeting, when we talked about actually having special education teachers or education specialists as resources to the students for reading especially. And this was discussed prior, and I spoke about what our intent was on our committee. We were very concerned about the language that was being used, so support specialist. I asked to speak earlier about that because the name means a lot, because what it's doing is saying that we are able to teach general education students. I understand the spirit of MTSS and where we're going with supporting all students. I'm speaking specifically to bullet number 2 that is very nebulous in what we're saying, and in working with interns and also being a 20-year special education teacher myself and as a parent of a special education student, I'm very concerned about what that means for our teachers and what that means for our students. For example, I work in supervising students, candidates, sorry, I'm still nervous, and with our interns and in teaching our interns, and they are so overwhelmed. I'm asking you to talk to our special education teachers currently in the field, especially with their caseloads, and what this is going to mean for them and for serving our students. I don't know if I was clear, but I'm very concerned. As Jane talked about, this was not part of what is out in the field, and this is being put in again second time. So I'm very concerned of what that's going to do.
Commissioners, now I will turn it over to you for comments and questions. Commissioner Brown, did you want to kick that off?
I think with the comments that have come, I'm wondering if we could, could we ask the staff to respond particularly to the issue around the CSET barrier? Am I out of line here? I just didn't understand where that was going, and it seemed like that was worth appreciate to be educated on the options there that already exist.
Special education teachers meet subject matter as would a multiple or single subject teacher, which means for all of the content areas, multiple subject and the 14 single subject areas, there's both an option to pass a CSET exam or to complete a commission-approved elementary subject matter program or commission-approved single subject matter program. The programs are not as prevalent as they were historically. Back in 2004, due to No Child Behind, we had to close all the elementary subject matter programs. So there was a period of overturners due to how California defined highly qualified, where all elementary teachers did have to take and pass the CSET. That is no longer the case. This past year, you adopted standards for the elementary subject matter programs. We've had reviews going on, and we've had programs come to you in the consent calendar for approval. They're just not prevalent across the state yet. I think we'll have more and more of these as we go. There are also concerns that there are some candidates who have a lot more trouble with a standardized exam. Having that program option for them is very helpful. And it sounds like they're asking now, could there even be broader options? And we are going to bring an item to you in the next number of meetings about that, because for some credentials, maybe it would be appropriate to have a more open option. I could think that if it's a math credential, it might make sense that if you have a degree in math or a closely affiliated field, maybe that's also applicable. Maybe if you have that degree from a regionally accredited institution, maybe you would not have to do either the commission-approved program or the CSET exam. So we will bring an item to you about subject matter in the future at a future meeting and allow you to have that conversation.
Commissioners, any other comments, questions? Commissioner Zeppels?
So again, I reiterate my thanks in the hard work that's been done in this item. And also as I'm getting colleagues email throughout AICCU institutions, it seems that there continues to be general support for option 1. On the handout, I did disseminate that to folks that were able to look at it. There is does seem to be concern, as was stated, on bullet 2. So I think there needs to be some reflection and wording and some work to ensure that we're not going backwards, but really full in that language. And similar to the item 4G, just fine tuning and an opportunity for the field to be able to fine tune and look at the names and the language. They would appreciate that opportunity to continue as to reflect and provide that opportunity. One other thing. Okay, forgot one other thing, and also possibility to add instructional and behavioral goals in this in the handout. There was a mention, since you were talking about brainstorming additional items, to add instructional and behavioral goals would be a desire.
Commissioner Gonzalez has had to step out because there's something happening at one of his schools, and so he's a little emergency that he's attending to. So we'll continue. I was going to try to get on his list to speak next, but I'll see if others want to call on myself. Let me see if anyone else. Yeah, Commissioner Greenough-Shire.
A couple of comments. I appreciate the staff continuing to provide revisions, and this is such an iterative process. So I know it came late to us, but I appreciate that it's here and that we have something to chew on for our deliberations. When I look at the second bullet about specialized instruction, I was weighing some of the comments about the impact on the workload for education specialists. I was weighing whether this really reflects the kind of collaborative teamwork we want to put in place in schools that are implementing an MTSS framework, and I don't think it does. And I really appreciate the comment about how we should be trying to build capacity of school teams. So I don't think this language does it yet. I also, unless I'm not reading it correctly, I don't think there's specificity that would allow this support specialist to work with students who don't have IEPs. So I don't think the language is there yet. I think the intent is there, and I think we need to work on this some more.
That relates to the comment I was going to make, so I'll call on myself. We haven't done this in the credential language in the past, but I think we're at a moment where this makes sense, and I was going to propose to the language here that says the special education teaching credential, whatever the name is, authorizes the whole two, and maybe this becomes the second bullet, support teachers in modifying instruction to meet students' needs. Because I think one of the things that we're moving towards in an MTSS context is that this is not just authorizing to, treat kids one-on-one, so to speak, or in small groups or whatever. It's also enabling the knowledge base of the specialist to be made available to teachers. And I think it's time for us to do that. I think it would address the very well-stated concerns in that regard. As I read this, I think the second bullet, which would now become perhaps the third bullet, is not specifically tied to an IEP. So it would allow, for example, to work with a student who had a need for specialized instruction in an MTSS, in a tiered system of support, which might be a student with a 5 plan, or, it might be a student who's dyslexic or whatever and not identified with an IEP. So I think we're pretty close with this, and I would, with that amendment, I'd like us to consider moving that forward. I also would wanted to appreciate Terry's coming to the table around the coursework alternatives, and I'm eager for us to have that conversation about what are both the potential next generation CSET considerations and the next generation coursework alternative considerations. But I did hear a lot of aside from those issues, which we need to keep working on, support for number one, the option one. So I think moving forward on that with the idea that we'll continue to improve the range of options available could make sense. Commissioner Redmond, and then Commissioner Hind, and then Commissioner Brown, and then Commissioner Barnes.
I appreciate your proposal. I appreciate everything that folks, all the work that folks have done here, all the testimony here as well. With your suggestion, with a multi-tiered system of support, it's a system. So we're maybe working with teachers and school leaders.
Right, that would be a good thing to, maybe it's support other educators rather than just limiting it to teachers. Good point. I think Commissioner Hind was next, and then Commissioner Brown, and then Commissioner Barnes.
I have a question. On page 6, under recommendations for consideration and potential action, when you're number 4, are we suggesting that current credential holders would have to do more work to catch up to the new, or could we grandfather them in with the credential that they already have and have this be for new credential candidates?
We thought about that. The challenge is that the options which reflect the preparation the person has had differ. William has the specifics. There's a number of federal disability categories that are not currently in the credential. Those people were not prepared to work with any student with that federal disability category. In the new world, we're looking at pretty much any disability category as long as it's the mild to moderate needs. So we thought there are two options. We could just say everyone from the old world will get the new authorizations. But there's a concern in that if you were not prepared for, say, orthopedically impaired students were not listed in the prior mild moderate, so that you have a decision. Now, the teacher's been out there working, and they may very well be ready for that. So it's your decision. Do you want the other ones to renew and get this more expansive authorization, or do you want to keep them with what they were prepared for?
So what I would like to see, and we can discuss this further, is that those credential holders that are already holding their credential maintain their credential. They don't have to, well, of course they would maintain their credential, but that they wouldn't have to be required to do more work to get the new authorizations, but that might be an opportunity for districts to offer professional development that will keep them up, because things are changing all the time. And I do think the experience that they've had in the classroom, however many years, does give them the preparation for different needs. But I could be wrong. I'm not a special ed teacher. I know that the special ed teachers I've talked to really don't want another thing that they have to go out and get.
Yeah, we don't want, with the shortages that we have, we don't want to push people out of special education. So it may be that this number 4 and 5, which are about how we build the bridge and what the future holds and what the timeline is and all those kind of things, I don't know that we've heard enough about that to be sure how we want to do that yet. And I wonder if we might, again, I'd love to hear from others on the commission, but maybe we want to hold that question, get some more conversation on the table about the options there, and then come back to that, because it is obviously it's a big decision for all the people in the field, and we don't want to make it without a lot of information on that. So that's a thought. Commissioner Brown, you're next.
A couple of things. One is I'm sensitive to making sure that we get the transparency and the community input that we want on these new authorization statements. I'm really excited that we're looking at how we can. I actually liked number 2, but I can see it needs some more work. There's 2 things I'd like to add into that mix. One is I would agree that supporting other educators, other teachers, teacher teams, administrators, etc., is an excellent addition. Also, in early childhood, and not just early childhood special ed, we find ourselves regularly working with, aligning with, partnering with families. So I want to bring that up as a thought, because all my colleagues that are in early childhood special ed join me in early childhood education in really seeing that as one of our prime clients. I'm not trying to add work to teachers, but I think that that's something that people already do, and I think it should be considered. And finally, as the system is developed, I'm looking at the part that says kindergarten grades 1 through 12 through age 22. I'm thinking that that should include TK, since that's really part of our system now.
Kindergarten. TK is kindergarten. It is the first year of a two-year kindergarten.
We don't need to call out
no,
TK.
Kindergarten means both TK and
K. Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Barnes.
Yes. Actually, Commissioner Hines brought up something that I was going to bring up about number 4 and 5, like what does the bridge look like? How does it impact current teachers? I can just hear them. What does this mean?
Yeah.
Also, the fear of, is this going to affect my job? Because the people coming in are going to have this more specialized credential, even though probably they are doing it, they just don't have it. So I could just see some concern and fear out there. But again, I agree, we don't have enough information. So, and then just a second comment on, we were talking about bullet 2 and then the bullet that you inserted, and then the statement that maybe the special ed teacher could help out, students who aren't special ed, maybe 504, whatever. That sounds great, but then in my head, I hear and see my colleagues saying, well, wait a minute, what does that look like? I already have a caseload of this, unless it's because I'm pushing into a classroom, which I know we have I don't know if the correct word is, but that's what we call it. They're pushing in and supporting now. We have teachers doing that, so they do help all students in the classroom.
That's exactly what that's.
Okay, make sure, because I can hear my colleagues up and down just kind of like, well, what do you mean I'm going to be in charge? I can now teach general ed students. So that's just a fear out there. It may not be that. That's just a perception because they're not in these meetings, they're not hearing all of this. So I just thought I'd express that.
I think that seeing no more hands, I'll just confirm what you were just hypothesizing, that the concerns we heard about being sure that the multi-tiered system of supports is represented, and the push-in model where you're co-teaching in an inclusive classroom with the teacher of record, who is the general ed teacher, is what was intended. I think we may be in a position, if we put 4 and 5 aside, because there are a lot of big questions that we want to be sure we're very, very careful about there, to look at numbers 1, 2, and 3 for a possible motion with respect to the existing requirement for ed specialists to meet college requirements for the credential. I'm now looking at page EPC 4H5, where the recommendations are with respect to potentially this new authorization statement, and then with respect to the definition of language and academic development, and then maybe table 4 and 5 till we can really look at that carefully. 3 was pulled. I'm sorry. So 1 and 2 are really on the table. So I wonder if we might consider a motion. Oh, you want to?
With all due respect, I think that we're not there yet for item 2. I think conceptually we are, but I think what I'm hearing, this language does not reflect the concerns that I still have.
Could you say more about your concerns?
So I'm concerned that this language does not emphasize collaboration with other educators and leaders and family members sufficiently. I would like us to name, instead of saying tiered system of support, I would like us to name multi-tiered systems of support so we get used to using that language. I hadn't thought about the implications of including support in the title. I think it's the right title, but if paraprofessionals are those support people on campuses, is this going to be confusing to the field? So conceptually, I am in agreement.
I think we can put the title question off and adopt that we have the raffle to fill the title in. But the other points are important, and I'm jotting them down as you go through them.
Okay.
it's to remember too that any new terms in the bullet there or in what you just read will be defined, have to be defined.
Right.
In regulatory language. So that second bullet, it says provide specialized instruction based on student needs to students requiring intervention in a general education setting. We can put within a multi-tiered system of support. We could put that, add the multi to that,
right.
certainly,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So within a multi-tiered system of support.
Could we also add in collaboration with and list those other entities?
Can you say more? In collaboration with families?
In collaboration with other educators and family members within a multi-tiered system of support.
Or maybe it's separate bullet.
Maybe it is.
So it doesn't get too. So here's what I've been jotting down. Adding a bullet that says support other educators in designing instruction to meet students' needs. Maybe a separate bullet, collaborate families and educators in the service of students. Provide specialized instruction based on student needs to students requiring intervention in a general education setting within a multi-tiered system of support. And then the rest would remain the same. I think, it's important for us to try to move forward, and we will have the opportunity to fine-tune at each juncture, right? Because we'll see this again in August. We will see it again in regulation. So if we look at it and say, okay, we need to tweak it yet again, we can't. But these are important additions.
Is there a sense of urgency to move the authorized statements forward at this point? Because I too am concerned with the wordsmithing that's taken place here without getting any response from the field, especially as comments were addressed in regards to the transparency piece.
I don't think it's essential that there's an adoption today. It sounds like you've pretty much agreed option 1 for content knowledge makes a lot of sense. So that may be where you want to take an action today. I do want to point out that historically, the Commission has not put things into authorization statements that people are already able to do separately. The idea of working with other adults, all teachers can do that, and it's not in any authorization statements. I think it was Roxanne earlier this week who said the authorization of the single subject credential is like one line. The individual is authorized to teach the classes in the content area, kindergarten through grade 12, classes organized for adults in a departmentalized setting. That's all that's for single subject teachers. The ability to work with other teachers, the ability to provide professional learning for other teachers, the working with families, none of that historically has been in any of the Commission's authorization statements. So we have to figure out with our regulatory folks and their language, is it appropriate in the actual authorization statement or does it exist somewhere else? Because of course we want special ed teachers to do all these things. The authorization statement is what frames the Commission's assignment monitoring process and what frames the department's special ed monitoring. And that working with other adults, with paraprofessionals, with families, all teachers are authorized to do that already because they have a credential. So I think we could bring some language back to you in August, really fine-tune this. I think we still have some conversations to have across constituency, make sure that we're really clear in what it is we're bringing back to you.
Okay, Commissioner Guinashar and then Commissioner Zumot. Okay.
Terry, I appreciate that clarification, and I'm reflecting on earlier conversations that we've had at the Commission about can't we insert language to make higher ed faculty work together? And when I was dean, you can't do that, and in my current position, you can't do that. But whatever we can do to facilitate that collaboration across general ed and special ed is I think that's where I'm coming with this particular language, is how do we encourage and support adults to work together in multi-tiered systems of support?
I think we need to really look through all the regulatory language, put it together for you in August, and bring it back. There is a section in the regulations about what special education support is, and it does include specifically instruction with students, parents, teachers, other community and school personnel, planning and developing, implementing instructional program plans. So there's a lot of different sections that exist, and I kind of think we have to bring you more so you see what's already in there.
Executive Director Sandy, and then Commissioner Sloan.
And I think he's back if you want to.
Oh, you're back. Sorry. No.
I think that I just wanted to add that we're at a point with this particular credential. I mean, that Terry's completely right that the way we technically write in regulatory language what somebody's authorized to do, it's really not for public consumption, because it's all inside baseball. It's all about how we work on various things. And yet, at this moment, what we've done is we've put out there, what is it that a special ed teacher should know and be able to do? The last item was all about what they should know and be able to do, and this is what will actually authorize them to. We're experiencing a huge sea change with MTSS coming in, and I'm afraid that if we stick to the same traditions in our authorization statements, that it will not be understood by anyone, including anybody who's doing any monitoring, that we expect these teachers to be able to provide coordinated services with other adults in a school that's organized for multi-tiered systems of support. It may be true, and I trust our technical staff on this, that you're already authorized to do that. It'll also be necessary to have an affirmative statement of that going forward. And it gets right to the issue also of whether that specialist can walk into somebody else's classroom and work with kids who don't have an IEP. And what I'm hearing at this table is, yes, they should be able to do that. And what I'm hearing start to murmur in the audience is, whoa, what about caseloads? And we get stuck behind that 8 ball every single time. And how long are we going to be stuck behind it before we say that teachers with this credential are able to work with students in whatever setting they find themselves in? They can't be a teacher of record in a gen ed classroom because that's not the system we built. But they're a specialist, and they ought to be able to work with students and teachers and others in a coordinated system of supports that meets the needs of the kids who are there. And there's too much confusion about that point. Division about that point at the moment. I think we have to make some very clear statements at this table about affirmatively what we expect this teacher to be able to do and where and with whom. And that's what, and crafting this stuff in committee is harder than doing it by yourself, promise me. I promise you. But it's really quite clear that your values as a commission be expressed, the document itself, capture that in a way that is absolutely clear and not ambiguous to anybody. I just wanted to offer that.
Commissioner Zeppels.
So I think, as I'm hearing from folks in the field, the AICCU institutions would love more time to discuss 2, 4, and 5. But I think option 1 is something that we would feel comfortable moving forward with today.
Commissioner Sloan.
Wanted to build on briefly this idea around how we bridge between current credential holders and future credential holders. And it isn't just about credential holders with special education credentials, because our new credential holders in special education are upon general education teachers to have new skills and abilities with students as well. It's a whole system, as we have talked about. And as we think about and come up with solutions for bridging for everyone, we should consider what's already happening in schools. Danette Brown's example of what's happening system-wide in a school to bring everybody's education up to support all students are the kinds of things that we should be thinking about as we are considering this.
We need a motion. Commissioner Hine.
I will move staff recommendation number 1. that the commission maintain the existing requirement for ed specialists to meet content knowledge for their credential.
Do we need a clarification? Do we still have our quorum back? Okay. So we have a motion to adopt, I believe it was item 1 of the agenda item. Do we have a second? Commissioner Klatt, any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. I'd like to thank all of our stakeholders, staff, just for modeling collaboration, in-depth thinking, and really leveraging the intellectual assets that we have in our state and getting us to this point, and the work will continue. Thank you, Mr. Hattrick, Dr. Solari Colombini. Having no additional items, I adjourn the Educator Preparation Committee.
Let's take a 5-minute break, no more. A little bit more to get through, and we're going to start losing our quorum at around 11:30. But
Am I on?
All right. Welcome back to the table. You're going to report the closed session, right? Good. Hear me twice, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Yes. All right. Next is the Certification Committee. Commissioner Klatt, will you please convene the committee?
Yes, thank you. I now convene the June 2018 meeting of the Certification Committee to order. We have one agenda item. Item 5A is repeal of numerical limits on speech-language pathology services, credential waivers, and future rulemaking. This is an action item that will be Tammy Dugan. Ms. Dugan, will you begin?
Thank you, and good morning, members of the Commission. In October 2014, the Commission approved criteria for the issuance and reissuance of variable term waivers to individuals seeking speech-language pathology credentials, heretofore to be referred to as SLP. Included in the approved criteria were numerical limits on the number of SLP waivers an individual may be issued. So effective January 1st, 2015, that number was set at a total of 5 SLP waivers with the possibility of 2 additional waivers for individuals who held multiple subject or education specialist credentials because they'd need a little longer to meet the criteria for program enrollment, and for individuals with valid medical reasons. So a total of 7 if individuals met criteria. Following feedback from the field, the Commission amended the criteria related to the numerical limits set for the SLP waivers. The amendment approved in February of 2015 allowed for 2 reissuances for individuals who had already had 4 prior to that January 1st, 2015 date. An application for reissuance of an SLP waiver for Suzanne Oken submitted by Long Beach Unified School District was denied by staff based on that criteria. Ms. Oken appealed that decision, and that was brought to the Commission in September 2017. The Commission approved reissuance of that SLP waiver. Staff recommends that the Commission repeal the numerical limits related to the issuance and reissuance of SLP waivers. It is further recommended that the Commission direct staff to propose regulations establishing numerical limits for all waivers and the handling of waiver applications from qualified individuals with a disability. And I'm happy to answer anything you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Dugan. We do have some public comment cards. I'd like to call up Jenny Teresi, if you can state your name and affiliation for the record.
Jenny Teresi, Credentials Administrator with Riverside County Office of Education. We're a little unclear on where you're going with this item. If you do decide to place a specific limit on all types of waivers, we just wanted to encourage the additional time for those people that have the multiple subject or education specialist credentials to be able to have that additional couple years or some amount of time so they can complete the undergraduate piece before they get into the graduate program to get the SLP. That's just one thing. We don't want to see that go away. Now, there is one area of waivers that is really an issue for CTE teachers. They enter into a 3-year preliminary program, and the English learner portion is embedded. However, every year of that 3-year period, they must, if they're providing English learners, are required to apply for a 1-year waiver for 3 consecutive years, which we feel is pretty costly for those teachers while they're going through their program, which is an embedded program, but it doesn't authorize the English learner services while they're on that preliminary. So we would like you to consider for those candidates in the 3-year CTE program, if they could be apply and be issued a 3-year waiver for just the English learner portion. And it just would take away that additional burden on those candidates. And I do think that was it. We just whatever limit you set, we just hope it's too restrictive. Thank you.
Thank you. Rigel Massaro, please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning, Rachel Massaro with Public Advocates. Generally speaking, I read the item as asking the Commission to direct staff to consider a potential limit sort of across the board to all types of waivers. We understand waivers are needed by individuals who are not fully authorized to teach the students they're in front of. And so generally speaking, we support there being a limit. We want to ensure that folks are making considerable progress toward achieving the credential or the authorization they need to be legally authorized. We do note in the past 4 years, there's been a 225% increase in the number of waivers granted. Most of these are for individuals serving students with disabilities. I have so many questions about this issue. This is an issue that I had to do a lot of research on and didn't get to finish it before this moment. I wonder how much of this, my understanding is the SLP shortage is long-standing. I wonder too, just kind of looking at the different waivers granted by the Commission, how much are due to influx of out-of-state teachers who need a waiver around for their professional development for English learners. We'd like some more data around the need. I had a hard time connecting the numbers with the waivers themselves. So I went to the dashboard, and on the dashboard, I found I could find the waivers by the type of teaching credential. So multiple subject, single subject, and education specialist. But then when I go on and look at the types of waivers that have been granted, it's all different types of waivers. So I didn't see on the data dashboard, perhaps I missed an area where I could see SLP waivers, for instance, or certificate completion of staff development waivers. And if we had that type of information, I feel like there's a sort of policy question that accompanies this limit on waivers. Namely, what do we need to do to get the right people, enough of these individuals into the spots that we need? If we have a long-standing short, we can see in this budget that after many, many years of pushing, sometimes you can really get some great results. So we need that information to build that case. I also had a perhaps slightly unrelated question, but I found that I couldn't find, trying to understand the piece around progress is perhaps just something that has been deemed inappropriate for the public. But when I would look up an individual that's received a waiver on the Search for an Educator on the Commission's website, I couldn't actually see that person had a waiver. And that kind of struck me as odd from the public perspective, wanting to know that someone has a waiver if they're teaching your child. Important. So big picture, I think, we don't want individuals in front of our English learners and our students with disabilities to teach on a waiver for more than is absolutely needed. It's always helpful to hear from Jenny Teresi and understand better what is needed. That's why I think I would personally appreciate a more in-depth discussion of this item. Where are the areas where we see the most need around waivers? That was hard for me to understand from just looking at the dashboard and past items on this issue. And why are people needing these waivers exactly? I think in 95% of the cases, it's folks really trying to do the right thing. And so I don't want to impose an artificial number that's going to limit sort of the individuals who are really doing as much as they can while they're in the classroom. And at the same time, I have heard that we can have up to 19 waivers for an individual, and that just seems wrong. So I would be interested to know more about those numbers and the kinds of waivers that a limit would really impact. And overall, I do support a limit. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment cards, do commissioners have comments or questions on this item?
I have all those questions that Rigel just asked.
And mine's a question. So are we, by taking action, we're going to yield and then identify new limits?
The way I understand this will occur is that you will repeal, and at some point we would bring an item back to you that would set a broader frame and a broader policy context, at which time we'll be prepared to provide you the kinds of data that you're asking for and be able to discern and, as a group, determine where, if at all, you'd like to establish limits based on the data that's produced. So this is just the first step of a multi-step process. The next step will involve data and opportunity for you to decide.
So what happens to the waivers that may be in the queue between the time of us repealing and setting those new limits?
Go ahead.
If someone has a waiver and you establish a limit in regulation, the waiver you issued won't be taken away from them. That's a property right. But thereafter, anyone applying for a waiver would be subject to those new regulations.
But to answer your question, anybody in the queue now, if the numerical limit is repealed today and they've exceeded that, we would process it under the old policy, old criteria as related to limits, meaning there are no limits. Did you make progress? Do you meet the requirements for reissuance until we can get the regulations in place?
Other comments? As I'm understanding it, this is kind of a two-part recommendation then. One is to repeal the current policies, but then start the ball rolling so that we can have regulations in place instead of policies. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Are there people ready to move, or other comments or questions?
So if we repeal the current policy, I think all the questions that Rigel put on the table are unanswered, and I'd like to hear some answers to those. How many people get? What kind of progress do they need to make? How are we notifying the public where people are in that process? Because it sounds like what we're being asked to do is kind of get rid of the current policy which restricts waivers and have no accountability at all, is what could be understood to be.
Our waiver regulations right now are somewhat general. So I see this as an opportunity to put in place a lot of our policies surrounding them. And there are different types of waivers. We issue bi waivers. And those are normally a 1 year to give the person a chance to verify their oral language proficiency. Then they move on to a permit or into a program. There are different ones that won't be this 5 or 7 year limit for all. If that's what you still want for the SLP, we'll certainly make the language reflect that. But it'll be all of our policies and getting them all into regulations and setting limits for each type of waiver document. And we can bring all of that data forward with this regulation language.
The ultimate goal of this item is not to undo any authority you may or may not have as to waivers. The goal of the item is that you enact in regulation. How do you deal with applications for waivers from individuals with qualifying disabilities? And we need a regulation addressing that. And in repealing this, you're going to have a gap, as you've pointed out. And so we need to bring something back to you to give you the information to assess, do we want to place limits on waivers? Do we want to make numerical limits at all? If you do, you need to do it in regulation so that it is enforceable. And if you do that, you have an individual with a qualifying disability asking for a waiver, it's arguable that that is a request for a reasonable accommodation, and there needs to be a regulatory scheme addressing that issue, and that's the goal here. But certainly any decisions you make as to waiver limits are yours, and I agree that you need data to do that. But in terms of what we need you to authorize us to do today, it more focuses on the how do you deal with waiver applications from individuals with qualifying disease.
So can we get those data at the next meeting and be pursuing that process? And can we also ask the staff to deal with the question of if somebody's operating on a waiver, what is the expectation for the progress making? How is that going to be, like all those kinds of questions about
the continued progress of any individuals completing the expectations. That would be great to have all in one place.
Initially and then come back with regulation language later, or we can build it from whatever decision.
I think it would be useful if it's plausible to bring both, because it sounds like we have a gap that we want to begin to fill as quickly as we can.
Absolutely, yes, we can have that for you.
So with that, I don't know if other people have questions. I'd be prepared to move the recommendation. Calling somebody to say.
So I think that was a motion from Chair Darlene Hammond, and I think that was a second from Commissioner Hind. And one thing I'd like to add as discussion, or yeah, we can discuss before we vote, right?
Yeah.
Is that because regulation, I think it does open it up to the public, and the transparency and the steps that we have to go through in the regulatory process, I think do open it up for public participation and comment. So I guess I feel comfortable with what we're doing, because knowing that those other steps are still going to happen before any change occurs. Any other question or discussion before we have a vote? All right. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? All right. The motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Dugan. This concludes the business before the certification committee. The committee is adjourned.
Okay, I will reconvene the general session and move to agenda item 2H, interview and recommendations as to vacancies, members and alternates for the Committee of Credentials. And we have an ad hoc report. The ad hoc committee recommends to the, should I be the one reading this? Who can?
I think that would be Commissioner Cooney or Klatt.
Do you have it? There it is. Commissioner Cooney, could you please share the report of the ad hoc committee with our gratitude?
I would be glad to. The ad hoc committee met on Wednesday afternoon. We interviewed 5 candidates for various positions. 2 of the candidates were interviewed in person, and 3 were interviewed over the telephone. The results of those interviews and discussion among the ad hoc committee, which included Commissioner Kung as well as Commissioner myself, are as follows. We recommend that 1 additional vacancy be declared for public member on the Committee of Credentials, so that we would have 2. We have 1 already. If the commission adopts our recommendation, we would have 2 vacancies. We recommend the appointment of Wade Steve Thorpe and Scotty Cameron Bird to serve in the public member positions of the Committee of Credentials effective July 1. The committee also recommends that Robert Elder be appointed as a public member alternate, Rushkan Fernando be appointed as a school board member alternate, and Kevin Thompson be appointed as a secondary teacher alternate. All of the resumes of those 5 individuals were in our packet. I believe it was item 2H, but it's in there if you didn't have a chance to look at it. So I think the recommendation of the committee is sufficient to put the matter on the table for action by the commission. Well, I think the committee recommendation passes the need to move. So it's as if we moved, and we are moving, that the commission, yeah.
Commissioner Klatt, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Yeah.
I want to appreciate that all of the applicants who took their time to apply and their willingness, because they were all very very full and well qualified, and just anyone who's willing to serve on that committee, I just have gratitude. It's such a heavy load, and all of the people that we spoke to seemed very willing and edified.
Terrific. All right. All those in favor say
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Motion carries. The next is agenda item 2I, report of the closed session agenda. Commissioner Hyde, will you read that report?
Yes. Staff briefed the Commission on cases of Kathleen Carroll v. CTC, Dr. John Doe, Educator v. CTC, and Juan Jaimes v. CTC, and no reportable action was taken. The Commission granted the following petitions for reinstatement: Sahar Bakhdaud, Kenneth Cortez, Nika Claire Wong. The Commission denied the following petitions for reinstatement: Russell Hunt, Alvina Sheely, Kelly Leslie. The Commission adopted the following proposed decisions: Carlitha Allen, Jeanette Bailey Sanchez, Jorge Chavez, Lupe Gutierrez, Joseph Hoggett, Candace Harmon, Kathleen Randall, Beverly Vaughn. The Commission rejected the proposed decision in the matter of Mark Petrowski and called for the transcript. The Commission granted the following requests for reconsideration and sustained its previous decisions: Danette Bowles, Jerome Butler, Alita Campos, Paul Dahl, Robert Florentino Pasquale, Kathy. The Commission denied the request for reconsideration in the matter of Miriam Aguilar Escobar. The Commission discussed consent calendar item 6, Lisa Bartels; number 7, Anita Baskin; number 10, Timothy Bennett; number 44, Michael Jalbert; number 55, Stephanie Nichols; number 69, Maricela Verzosa; number 77, Raul Wooton, and remanded the matters back to the Committee on Credentials.
All right. Thank you very much. Very busy closed session. Item 2J is new business. The bi-monthly agenda is presented for information. And are there any audience presentations? All right. Seeing none, I will now adjourn the June 2018 meeting of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. And the next meeting is on August 2nd and 3rd. August 2nd and 3rd. We will see you then.